I, Alpha Aaron Young, reject Kylie Paxton as my mate. I heard the words I feared the most. My former mate, Alpha Aaron, looked at me coldly and uttered the rejection. Welcome to the Alpha's Love channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Chapter 29 Departure. It was day 3 of post-Evergreen Pack's function that Luna丨awoke feeling warmer than ever before. Landon had left a few hours earlier to oversee some patrols, and she had her own procedures to overlook. But as丨tried to move out of bed, the heat became even more unbearable, and she found herself having to calm down by inhaling what was left of her mate's scent in his pillows. She immediately knew what it was. Landon, I'm in my heat. She mind-linked him. Less than a few seconds later, Alpha Landon's voice came through. Stay in bed, I'm on my way back. I'll tell Beta Elijah and Delta Cassidy to take over our duties for the day. Don't come out.丨obeyed and stayed in their shared bed, her skin prickling and the tension in her body slowly rising with each passing moment. Opal was whining inside her, impatient for the Alpha to come back and tend to their needs. She'd heard of a heat before, and the descriptions she'd heard of it did no justice. She eventually had to kick her blanket off the bed because of how unbearably hot she was becoming, resorting to pulling out a number of Landon's clothes and lying in them like a nest. She felt as though if she didn't find and bed Alpha Landon right now, she would literally die. She fortunately didn't have to wait for long before she heard the sound of the door opening and then shutting and locking outside in quick succession, before the scent of rain and forest burst through the door again. As Alpha Landon climbed onto the bed and leaned over her, however, his face looked more agitated than usual.丨frowned in concern. Landon, are you okay? I'm fine. He muttered, the agitation morphing into something bordering on possessiveness, as his eyes focused on hers. I just want to be with you. His lips pressed against hers and丨briefly forgot about that look. It was only several hours later, when they were both covered in sweat and catching their breath, that Landon, with丨curled up against him, spoke in a quiet voice. Are you aware that Aaron was across the road from our home?丨red water ran cold as she shifted to look up at her mate in disbelief. Are you serious? Landon nodded, that grim expression returning to his face again. As I was on my way here, I saw him leaning against a lamppost. His gaze was fixed on our house. A shiver of disgust went up丨spine. Did he speak to you? He tried. Landon snorted, leaning back against the headboard and crossing his arms. He wanted to ask where you were because he hadn't seen you in a while. I cut him off and told him it was none of his business.丨heaved a quiet sigh of relief, but the thought of her ex-mate possibly still watching her from a distance gnawed at her. Could he still be there? Landon shook his head, pulling丨protectively into his arms. I warned him to stay away from you, so I think he left. I've mind-linked the others just in case though.丨relaxed slightly at this, running a hand through her mate's blonde hair. Thank you. You are aware that Aaron has constantly been following you, right? Landon asked quietly, his eyes resting on hers with concern.丨met his gaze and nodded slowly. He hasn't exactly been subtle about it. Aaron hadn't spoken a word directly to her within these 3 days. It wasn't like she wanted to speak to him anyways, but she could feel his eyes on her from somewhere regardless of where she was. She knew that the other Alpha wasn't exactly the most welcome presence in the Moon River Pack. A lot of the members knew what he'd done to her, and the way Kylie had behaved at the function hadn't helped things on his end. And with his chosen mate unconscious from Wolfsbane, one would assume Aaron would spend most of his time indoors, looking after her. Instead, as she went about her days, whether for personal reasons or for pack duties, she always glimpsed that dark brown hair and green eyes somewhere. It was to the point where she had to station certain pack warriors nearby just in case Aaron tried something. If I didn't know any better, I'd say he regrets choosing Luna Kylie over you. Landon muttered, gently running his hand through Olwen's pale brown hair. Olwen snorted. A bit late for that. Landon pressed his lips to his mate's forehead, a pensive look on his face before he pulled away slightly. Don't mind me asking this, but if Aaron had come after you sooner, maybe before you met me again, would you have taken him back? The woman didn't hesitate in vehemently shaking her head. Maybe I wouldn't be as cold with him as I am now, but no. He had 2 years to put an end to what he and Kylie were doing, but yet he didn't, and he was the main reason why I was allowed to be exiled from the Silver Arrow Pack. And even if I did take him back, the way he and his father view Omegas in today's world, I wouldn't be happy. Perhaps as a Luna I'd just be reduced to a trophy mate and baby machine for Alpha Aaron. An unpleasant feeling settled in her gut at the thought of being mated to someone who would only be interested in using her to bear children. She was certain Landon wasn't like that, but as it was a well-known thing that Omegas had better childbearing chances than other wolves, she'd heard of a number of Omegas in the Silver Arrow Pack who were subject to such an unfortunate fate. I know that as Alpha of the Moon River Pack, having an heir must be important to you, Olwen spoke, resting a hand on Landon's chest. Whenever you want to start trying for a child. We don't have to start thinking about kids so early. The Alpha assured her, cupping her face and directing her gaze to his. Yes, I will have an heir someday, but carrying on my line is not why we'll be doing it. He kissed her nose, her cheeks, and then planted a soft one on her lips again. I will bear a child with you because I love you, Olwen. And the thought of our child having your hair, your eyes, or any other feature from you is enough to make me happy. Luna Olwen felt her heart skip a beat at Alpha Landon's words. The very image he just presented brought her warmth as well, but in her case the child didn't have to look like her. If their offspring carried Landon's dirty blonde hair or blue eyes, she would love them all the same. Well, when it's time, I look forward to it. She grinned mischievously at Landon. The Alpha chuckled and pulled her into his arms. So do I. The tense look hadn't completely faded in his eyes, and that was because Landon really did want to start a family with Olwen, but felt that as of now, he could only do so once everything was settled. Alpha Aaron sat in Croissants & Co., sipping a mug of hot chocolate with a stormy look on his face. The bakery wasn't that crowded today, with the odd customers walking in and ordering pastries or drinks to go. Jasper and Nicole popped out once in a while to serve their customers, and then went right back into the kitchen, probably avoiding him. He was certain Olwen was experiencing her heat. She had not emerged out of her home since morning, during which Landon had managed to convince him to reluctantly vacate the premises and come here to avoid another incident. The Alpha seemed to particularly care for his Luna, but the wild, impatient look in his eyes when he'd warned him to distance himself from Olwen could only come from a mate who knew his other half needed him desperately at the time. That should have been him, Aaron thought to himself. The one whom Olwen called to in her heat, the one who would take care of her throughout. They had been intimate before, but he'd never tended to her in her heat since he hadn't marked her. The very thought of Landon and Olwen curled up in bed and enjoying themselves, their marks on each other's necks, made Aaron seethe with envy and regret. Even this morning, seeing Kylie's mark on his neck made him want to scrub it off. Whenever he had to help Kylie through her heat, a part of him had just wanted to get it over and done with. With ours having still been shoving him images of Olwen around that time, and Kylie mad at him for what he'd done during their moment of intimacy, she never held eye contact with him during her heat, even when they were physically close. And once they were done, she immediately rolled onto her side and blocked her face from his with a pillow. Even before she was mad at him, the images of all their times in bed now paled in comparison to what he once had with Olwen. Before he chose Kylie over her, and she rejected him and broke the mate bond. Aaron's hand clenched on the table. His wolf was uncharacteristically silent, had been since the function. It was rather ironic, given that for the past few months Aaron had been attempting to make things work with Kylie, and ours had been the one dead set on sabotaging him out of loyalty to their once fated mate. But now, when Aaron finally realized that Olwen was the one he needed, ours was nowhere to be found. It probably meant that ours hopefully wouldn't give him any more trouble the next time he was intimate with Kylie, but that thought wasn't as thrilling or exciting as it once was. Kylie hadn't woken up yet, and as far as he could tell, neither had the Omega that she had injured. And even once she had, his mate would be too weak and unsightly for them to do anything physical with each other. Aaron had left the function quickly once her punishment was dealt, and with the rest of the leaders having returned to their packs already, there was no doubt that word was spreading of what had occurred. His father would definitely have something to say about his failure to control his mate that night, and he wasn't looking forward to it. The following days remained the same. Luna Olwen never left the confines of her home, and neither did Alpha Landon. Beta Elijah and Delta Cassidy ran things in their absence, with help from Gamma Josh and Stella. With Aaron outside most of the time, Beta Caden was obliged to keep a watch over his unconscious mate. It worked out, since he was too ashamed to find or even look at his family. Stella hadn't told her mother and brother as to what she and her father had discussed, and neither did Kale and Sylvie bother to seek him out themselves either. Kale had bigger priorities to take care of anyways. He'd confirmed what Kylie had tried to do that night at the function rather quickly thanks to the upgrades he'd made to the position and quality of security camera footage, and he and Josh were frequent visitors to Elise at the Pack Clinic. Mario Kart just wasn't the same without her, and they hoped she would wake up soon. Dr. Enzo was monitoring Elise with impressive faithfulness, and had informed Josh and Kale that she had not lost her connection to her wolf, but would still need a bit more time to recover from the effects of the wolfsbane nevertheless. He hadn't told anyone aside from Luna Olwen about him being Elise's mate, although he was half sure Alpha Landon knew, as well, saving that revelation for whether they could work things out once she was awake. Elise had gotten a surprisingly decent amount of visitors over the week. Once word got out about her protecting her Luna packmates that she had antagonized in the past, even some who didn't even know or speak to her, came by and left flowers and different types of gifts. Unsurprisingly, however, her parents hadn't shown up at all. Day 5 was when Elise woke up for the first time, and several days later was when Kylie regained consciousness. The first thing she saw when she came to was the ceiling lights, after which Beta Caden's face came into view. Alpha Aaron will be here shortly, he informed her, his voice and expression unreadable before he turned away. Kylie winced as she sat up in bed, her memory foggy. She felt weaker than she recalled, and when Kira didn't speak to her like she normally did, she slowly began to recall what had occurred. The wolfsbane injection she had been given had really severed her connection with her wolf, leaving her as vulnerable as a human for the time being. Tears welled up in Kylie's eyes, but she quickly dried them as she heard the sound of footsteps entering the room. Aaron stopped at the door. "You awake?" he said simply. Kylie quickly realized she couldn't smell Aaron's driftwood scent like she usually could. She didn't know until now how much she would miss it. "Aaron," she pleaded, reaching out towards him. A flicker of disgust passed through the man's eyes before he turned away. "Get dressed and pack up. We are heading back to the Silver Arrow Pack now that you're awake." She blinked. What? You heard me. We are heading back home," he said, turning and walking off to his own room. With what strength she had left without her wolf, Kylie called after him. "Aren't you going to help me pack? You put yourself in this state, so no." Aaron responded flatly, slamming the door shut behind him and making her flinch. After a few more minutes, Kylie climbed out of bed, her legs shaking as she made her way to the mirror. Upon catching sight of herself, she grimaced. She looked thinner and frailer than she recalled, and her complexion lacked the healthy flush it needed. She would regain her color on her own after a few days, but as long as her wolf didn't return, her physique wouldn't return to its former state. Kylie surveyed the room, identifying the array of things she'd taken out when they'd first arrived here and swallowing, before begrudgingly packing everything back into her suitcase on her own. This included a multitude of clothes since she hadn't decided on what to wear before getting there, all her makeup and shoes. This should have been nothing, but given her weakened state compared to her normal self, it just made her head feel heavier. After some time, she finally zipped up her luggage and dragged it outside to where Alpha Aaron and Beta Caden were awaiting. "Let's go, the helicopter landed 10 minutes ago." Aaron spoke sharply, not casting her a second glance and tugging his own suitcase behind him as he strode in front. Kylie tried to follow him, albeit lugging her own things. The walk to the car just outside their accommodation was practically a miniature walk of shame. As Aaron handled the checking out and led the way to the car outside, any Moon River Pack member they passed by either looked away or stared at them coldly. Without the natural strength of her wolf, Kylie found herself keeping her head down and avoiding everyone's gazes. The only reason why no whisper was uttered in their presence was perhaps thanks to Aaron, whose expression at that moment could kill anyone with a single glance. Alpha Landon and Luna Allwyn waited near their arranged car. The woman wasn't in the dazzling dress she'd graced the function in, but with her wolf intact, she still looked like an angel compared to the state Kylie was in. "Alpha Aaron, Luna Kylie." Alpha Landon spoke, shaking the former's hand. "Have a safe journey back to the Silver Arrow Pack." His expression was solemn and unmoving, and all Aaron could do was nod and dip his head. "Thank you for your hospitality. Again, I apologize on the behalf of what Kylie did." Not Luna Kylie or his mate, just Kylie. And the fact that Aaron's eyes were clearly flickering over to Allwyn as he spoke stung Kylie even more. "I would like to apologize as well." Kylie got out, knowing that if she allowed Alpha Aaron to do so on her behalf it would just make her look even worse. "To both Luna Allwyn and you." Luna Allwyn didn't respond aloud, and only watched as Aaron, Kylie and Caden got into the car, and it made its way out of the Moon River Pack. As soon as the car had left pack borders, she turned to Alpha Landon. "You're sure?" He nodded. "Yes, after what happened at the function I've come to a decision. We can't put this off any longer." Allwyn smiled at him, but she had a tense look in her eyes knowing what this could mean. Landon gave her the best confident grin he had in return and kissed her on the forehead. "Go? I believe the children are waiting for a story from you." As Allwyn headed away, Alpha Landon headed back into his office and started up his laptop. Finding the draft of an email he had created earlier that week, but had held off on sending until now, he first listed all the other alphas in the Evergreen Wilds save for Aaron. To all, enclosed in this email is the document to be forwarded to Alpha Aaron. If there are no further questions or concerns, and my challenge to the Alpha of the Silver Arrow Pack is recognized as legitimate, please sign it ASAP. Thank you. Regards, Alpha Landon Cartwright of the Moon River Pack Chapter 30 Exodus. As the Alpha and now temporarily humanesque Luna returned to the Silver Arrow Pack with their beta in tow, the first thing that was noticeable was that barely anyone was out there to welcome them back aside from Delta Jace and Gamma Edric. "Your father is waiting for you in your office." Delta Jace spoke to Alpha Aaron, not even looking at Luna Kylie as he talked. "Of course." Aaron pulled Kylie past the two men and headed to the Alpha's office. He briefly mind-linked Beta Caden to bring the luggages to his and Kylie's home. As they walked deeper into Silver Arrow Pack, the second thing noticeable was that the amount of people outside hadn't really changed much. In comparison to a usual day, the place may as well have become a ghost town. Figuring it was probably out of spite, after hearing of Luna Kylie's attempt to hurting Luna Allwyn at the function, Aaron sighed to himself and headed on towards the office building, where he was more than prepared to receive a tongue-lashing from his father. He and Kylie entered his office to see his father staring out the glass, his back to them. Aaron dipped his head, his eyes shooting to the floor. "Dad." Bradley said nothing, letting the silence reign within the room for about a good 5 minutes before he spoke a simple sentence. Almost half of the Silver Arrow pack have gone. Aaron dropped Kyla's wrist and stared at his father in disbelief, his face paling. What? A few days ago. Bradley turned around, his face stormy and eyes dark. They all packed and left in the middle of the night, no warning and nothing left behind. Aaron's mind blanked out in panic as the words sank in. Why? How? On hindsight, those were not good questions to start with, and Bradley slammed his fist on the table, startling both his son and Luna Kylie. Simple. Everyone heard about that pathetic stunt that he glared at Kylie, who shrunk back in terror without Kira's strength to back her up. Tried to pull at the function. And what's this I hear about Alwyn now becoming the Luna of the Moon River Pack? Dad, we don't know how it happened either, Aaron spoke up, stepping in front of Kylie. This wasn't really a matter of protecting his mate, but more of preventing his father from attacking someone unnecessarily again. Alpha Landon claimed that he took her into his pack and they fell in love, but that is not important now compared to what your stupid mate tried to do. Bradley cut him off harshly. He stood up, his eyes changing color as Bastion growled behind them. Didn't you assure me you would work together with her to upkeep a united front for the Silver Arrow Pack? Yes. I did. Aaron answered, trying to remain calm despite the amount of questions racing around in his head. We tried, we really did, but so many things happened that were out of our hands. Bradley scoffed, crossing his arms. Luna Kylie still chose to embarrass both herself and the Silver Arrow Pack by trying to poison another Luna in the open. What kind of image is she trying to present? Kylie swelled at this remark, but couldn't find it in herself to refute Bradley's words. It's no surprise that the rest of the leaders agreed with dishing out such a punishment on her, Bradley continued, not feeling an ounce of sympathy for the pitiful-looking she-wolf in front of him. Such foolishness is unbecoming of a Luna. Mr. Young, Kylie tried to speak, her voice softer than normal. And that brings me to how half the pack's disappearances came about. The older man interrupted her without a care. It was all thanks to the attendant that was working for you. Kylie squinted in confusion. What, Jessie? I would have easily stopped those traitorous masses from leaving if she hadn't drugged me. Bradley growled, making both the others' eyes widen. And it wasn't just me, she put the Delta, Gamma and all the other warriors meant to be patrolling the pack to sleep while she and the others made their way out. There was a long silence before Kylie quietly and nervously released a disbelieving laugh. Mr. Young, are you sure it was Jessie? The night before she served drinks to all of the affected parties, and they were all found to have been spiked, so yes. Bradley only looked angrier that Kylie was daring to question his reasonings. You assured us before you left for the function that your Omega attendant wasn't going to be a problem. How could you not notice what she was planning? The man demanded. Kylie tried to open her mouth, but closed it again. Other than giving Jessie orders and then taking her anger out on her if things went south, she hadn't known her attendant at all. Seeing he wasn't going to get anywhere with the woman, Bradley jabbed a finger at the door. You're useless without your wolf. Go home. Suddenly at a loss, Kylie had no other choice but to follow her father-in-law's instructions. She cast a glance at Aaron, but already knew he wasn't going to stick up for her and then left. The reputation of the Silver Arrow Pack is in tatters thanks to your mate. Bradley spat at his son once the Luna had left. She's not even capable of being a proper leader now thanks to her own actions. How exactly do you plan to recover from this? Give me time, Dad, I'll figure something out. Aaron said agitatedly, running a hand through his hair. This literally all happened in the span of a few days, and I'm only hearing about the pack members leaving now. Within a few more days, another pack may decide we are vulnerable and attack us. Bradley warned him, pacing back and forth. He took a few quick strides over and grabbed his son by the collar, as if contemplating hitting him for a moment before releasing him with a huff. I'm aware. I've mind-linked with Delta Jace to increase the amount of security around the pack with what warriors we have left. Aaron spoke firmly, taking a step back. It was the most Aaron could think of for now. If his father was telling the truth and that half the Silver Arrow pack had really left overnight, then there was no telling where these deserters would go. One might assume they could stay rogues or end up venturing to live amongst humans, but with his pack's reputation the way it was, other pack leaders whom they went to for shelter would jump on the chance to strengthen their numbers. Perhaps we could try to form a closer alliance with one of the other packs during this time. Aaron suggested, racking his brain. I recall that the Night Ridge pack is still indebted to us. I've always had a good relationship with Alpha Frederick. Save for the hiccup during the function, he might agree to something more, maybe training for both our warriors if I talk him into it. Bradley scoffed. You'd better hope he's still willing to talk to you. He got up and shoved Aaron into the Alpha's chair before taking a few steps to the door. And another thing. Yes? Aaron, halfway trying to draft an email to Alpha Frederick, looked up with a tense expression. I don't know what you plan to do with Miss Paxton, but the pack has already started talking regarding Olwen's reappearance as Alpha Landon's mate. They think she makes a better Luna than Kylie. Fix it. You don't want you or your mate to be put in a bad light by an Omega. As Kylie lugged her suitcase back to her and Aaron's home in the heart of the Silver Arrow pack, the surroundings remained scarce of pack mates. Areas that were once teeming with people were completely empty, the loudest sounds the wind and the scattered footsteps of the one or two pack members outside. When she passed them, the few that were there didn't nod their heads in respect to Kylie or Bo. They either looked away or gave her the most disgusted stares ever thought possible. Somehow, it was worse than what she'd experienced back in the Moon River pack, and it was their Luna she had tried something on. She thought she could rely on her friends for some comfort, having texted them before arriving back in the Silver Arrow pack, but received no reply from any of them. Some of them hadn't even bothered to read her messages. Had this been any other day, Luna Kylie might have marched straight to their homes and demanded some kind of explanation from them, but without Kira, she didn't have the strength nor authority. When the front door of her home came into view, she stopped in front of it, staring numbly at the words sprayed onto the wood in red. Home of the false Luna. Chewing her bottom lip, Luna Kylie raised a shaky hand to the doorknob and let herself into the house. She felt no comfort nor relief being at home after the function, knowing the moment she stepped back out there it was back to being public enemy number one. Heck, Aaron hadn't even bothered to look at her that much since she had woken up, and the few times he did look her way his green eyes were filled with nothing but frost. As Kylie dragged the luggage to their room to unpack, she suddenly was hit with the memory of Luna Olwen during the function. She stood high above everyone, giving her first official speech to the leaders, as the Luna of the Moon River pack and Alpha Landon's mate. With the light reflecting off the gems on her dress, the image Olwen gave off clashed greatly with the shattered, weak Omega. Kylie remembered the day she rejected Aaron. This wasn't a scorned ex-mate, this was a proper Luna, a leader, and that embittered Kylie to no end. That was the position she had imagined herself in as the Luna of the most powerful pack in the Evergreen Wilds, and somehow Olwen had taken her spotlight. It made things worse that after seeing Olwen reappear so abruptly, Alpha Aaron had practically spent the rest of the event either treating her as invisible, or to her humiliation, using her as a tool to try and make his former mate jealous. He had stared and pined after the other Luna, seemingly enraptured by her, and when Luna Olwen had suggested Kylie's punishment for the attempt to cut off her connection to her wolf, Aaron didn't choose to stand up for her. And now, given that Kylie couldn't sense Kira, and was reduced to the same status as a human woman, would he replace her? Or worse, would he beg for Olwen to take him back? He wouldn't. She'd been able to seduce him in the first place, because he hadn't been satisfied with Olwen. She was his chosen mate, his beautiful and strong Luna. But she was no longer beautiful nor strong, as long as she didn't have her wolf. And Luna丨may now have been mated to Unveiling, but she and Aaron were fated mates to begin with. Kylie had blamed the moon goddess for not bonding her to Aaron, but instead some random warrior, in a weaker pack. Could this be karma? As Kylie went into shower, she was suddenly accosted by a series of horrifying images. Her coming back home to Alpha Aaron and Luna丨pressed all up against each other in the sheets, their scents flooding the room. Aaron bluntly rejecting her and slamming the door in her face, not even bothering to see her out of the house. The glimpse of丨sneering face as they shut her out. Kylie had been secretly relieved when Aaron and丨mate bond was broken. She had been asking him how long he was going to wait since they had been nearing the lunar ceremony. But come to think of it, it wasn't even Aaron who had carried out the rejection first, it was丨. There was the slim possibility that had丨not found out about Aaron and her, he might have still allowed her to become his Luna and leave Kylie as his mistress. Kylie's eyes snapped open in disbelief, and she had to stare at the bathroom tiles in front of her for a moment to calm down and prevent herself from throwing up. Out of desperation, she took back every single insult she had thrown at the moon goddess in her life and prayed. Her wolf had to come back before it was too late. After hours of drafting that simple email to Alpha Frederick of the Night Ridge Pack, and listening to his father's scoldings and lectures about what had happened, Alpha Aaron headed back to his home at 11 in the evening. By the time he was back, Kylie had packed all of their things back into their respective places, and was fast asleep in their bed. After he had showered and changed, Aaron paused in the doorway before deciding to head off to sleep on the couch rather than with his mate. As he lay there with a blanket over his body, all he could think about was丨. He wanted to inhale her sweet lavender and honey scent, he wanted to run his hands through her soft brown hair, he wanted to kiss her. He would have given anything to have been able to pin her to the wall rather than Kylie that night at the function, show everyone that she was his. But she wasn't anymore. Aaron sighed and turned over in his spot. He knew if he wanted to he could relent, and head back into the bedroom, and embrace Kylie to sleep. Ours was perfectly docile for now, and with her wolf temporarily maimed, Kylie's green apple scent wasn't as strong. But as of now, her scent offered no comfort to him. "You heard丨." Ours spoke, startling Aaron. He'd been silent since the function. "She wished you happiness with Luna Kylie, didn't she?" "She did, but I'm not happy." Aaron responded to his wolf, albeit a bit more defensively than he'd intended. "I'm not happy with Kylie and how she tainted the image of our pack. Kylie is our mate, so we have to deal with it." Ours rumbled. Aaron frowned, turning to the other side. "Our mate? When since were you siding with Kylie?" "I'm not." The wolf replied calmly, sounding resigned and somewhat irritated. "You chose her and marked her, so she's your mate, and unfortunately that makes her and her wolf mine as well." Aaron snorted, curling the blanket around himself. "Last I checked you were still in love with丨and Opal. You wronged her." Ours huffed simply, and for a moment Aaron felt the pang of bitterness. "You made her reject us and did nothing when she was exiled from the Silver Arrow Pack. Perhaps I hoped that you would come to your senses and beg for her forgiveness, but you didn't. And now she is someone else's mate. I will not stand in the way of her happiness." Aaron couldn't help the indignance surging up inside him. When he'd chosen and marked Kylie, ours had resisted him all the way, resulting in him using those drugs more than he'd liked, and suddenly now when Aaron had changed his mind ours had given up. "What if I said that I wanted丨back, and that Kylie doesn't please me anymore? You've ruined her life enough." His wolf snorted. "I won't help you." Ours fell silent once more, and Aaron lay on his back and glared at the ceiling above. He didn't care what his father said about丨being an omega now. It was painfully clear to him that he'd made a mistake giving her up for Kylie. Besides, It had been partially Bradley's doing that Aaron had been able to hide his affair from Allwen for so long. He'd come upon that cabinet a few years after the rogue attacks, and despite the substances within being practically illegal throughout the Evergreen Wilds, his father had told him that alphas were responsible enough to know what to use them for. Aaron's curiosity had led him to look up what each substance did, and one of them was the drug he'd ended up taking each time he was with Kylie. Along with the fact that she was one of the Silver Arrow Pack's best warriors, it was why Bradley had willingly agreed to have Allwen kicked out of the pack and Kylie instated as Luna instead. Aaron had looked up to his father all his life, but if he was to cement his authority as the alpha of the pack, he needed to hold views of his own. If Jesse really had spiked all those members of the pack to engineer the departure of so many others, then Omegas were not as weak or spineless as he claimed. Before his thoughts could go further, he was suddenly reminded once again that his chosen mate was fast asleep in their bedroom. He knew from her expression the moment she awoke earlier that day that she wanted comfort after losing Kira, but by now her antics at the function had changed his dissatisfaction to something bordering on frustration and dislike. Perhaps he'd wait until after she recovered her wolf, but one thing for sure, Kylie Paxton could not be the Luna of the Silver Arrow Pack moving forward. Chapter 31 Union. Alpha Landon kept an eye on the responses slowly coming in from the other leaders. So far all of them were in favor of the challenge, emailing back the contract he had sent out with their signatures. In the meantime, he and Luna Allwen agreed to travel back to the human town to attend an official wedding for Beta Elijah and Stella. Given the recent and upcoming events, and their own tastes, Elijah and Stella had chosen for their human wedding to be a small event. The only attendees were Allwen, Landon, Kale, Sylvie and of course Elijah's parents Jasper and Nicole. Delta Cassidy and Gamma Josh once again were willingly taking over pack duties while they were out. 2 weeks had passed since the conclusion of the first Evergreen function that the Moon River Pack had hosted in decades, and certainly the most eventful. They hadn't heard a thing from the Silver Arrow Pack, but rumors had begun to surface of groups of pack members turning up at other pack territories and seeking shelter. Most assumed it was because Luna Kylie hadn't recovered from her wolfsbane punishment, and that the leaders of the so-called strongest pack in the wilds did not wish for their already tarnished image to further disintegrate. Since the function though, Delta Cassidy had begun upping the training of the warriors of the Moon River Pack, with the upcoming challenge and increased sightings of rogues. The pack needed security to be at its best. Gamma Josh had also looked over and gone through many of the new programs that Kale had helped set up, and as a result knew how to maintain them now without his mate having to show him. In Joshua's eyes, learning and making an effort to understand Kale's favorite interests was something a mate would always do, but for Kale it was like the Gamma had given him the world. Also on the subject of mates, Elise was awake now, had been shortly before Aaron and Kylie had left, but had not yet been discharged from the hospital. Fortunately, it was not because of her health. Her condition was stable, and her connection to her wolf Ember was still weak but there. After she'd awoken, Elise finally had a proper conversation with her fated mate. While she wasn't exactly 100% lovey-dovey with Dr. Enzo yet, the two were trying their best to make things work between them. Luna Allwen had heard a few days ago that having caught wind of the fact that their daughter was mated to the lower, but still decently reputable pack doctor, Mr. and Mrs. Ainsworth had finally made an effort to go see Elise. However, they were in the clinic for about only 5 minutes before Dr. Enzo was seen having them escorted from the premises with a solemn look on his face. Their mate bond had a ways to grow and develop, but it was a good start. But back to the wedding. It was meant to be a quiet affair, so they had rented out a restaurant, Elijah's suit and Stella's gown slightly more casual than a grandiose wedding, but suited to them both. The thing on their bodies that had taken the most money was the pair of rings, both with dark blue gemstones. Landon drove them all to the human town in the early hours of the morning, checking everyone into the motel before they commenced the procession. Though the only other people present were a minister and a photographer, the wide smiles on Elijah and Stella's faces told anyone that this was what they preferred. They didn't need many people witnessing their union, just those they cared about the most. As the best man and woman, Landon and Olwen watched their friends recite their wedding vows to one another. Their marks were hidden by their clothes, and though in the eyes of any wolf the couple were already tied together, witnessing them going ahead with this ceremony brought a beautiful sense of finality. And as the I-do's were finished and Elijah leaned in to kiss his bride, Olwen felt tears of happiness prick her eyes. She wasn't the only one. Elijah's parents were barely holding on, while Sylvie was watching the scene with a rather bittersweet smile. A part of her probably wished that Beta Caden was here to see this, but it was his loss. Cale was grinning at his older sister, while his hand rubbed Sylvie's back supportively. It still only felt like yesterday that Stella was still training alongside Olwen in the Silver Arrow pack, her only goal to take over as the Beta and having had no foresight of the events that would unfold. "Are you feeling all right, love?" Landon's voice was suddenly right next to her ear, making her heart flutter. She turned to gaze up into his blue eyes, and she nodded with a small grin. "Of course it's just." She sighed and looked back at the happy pair, who were now taking photos. "It's things like this that remind me that we've all come a long way in such a short span of time." "I can see that." Landon agreed, his own eyes moving to Elijah, who was holding Stella in his arms for the next picture. I saw the longing and frustration and fear that Elijah went through while he was still waiting to meet his mate, as much as he tried to hide it over the years. And now here he is, bonded to the one he loves. Olwen nodded. "I hadn't expected your best friend to be mates to mine, but they are perfect for each other." Their conversation was interrupted as Stella turned to beckon them over for a photo. They'd have the best man and woman in a picture, and then bring in all the other wedding guests. After the camera shutter had gone off a few times, Landon whispered into Olwen's ear as the photographer readied for another shot. "You know I wouldn't mind having a wedding like this with you somewhere in the future." He drew back and smiled for the next photo before Olwen could say anything else, and she turned back to the camera lens with a good visible blush accompanying her own grin. The next few hours flew by quickly. They danced and sang to music in the motel's karaoke bar, with Stella launching into a surprisingly decent rendition of Walking on Sunshine, as Elijah pulled Sylvie into a mother-son-in-law dance. Cale shrugged and decided to invite Nicole to a dance as well, with Jasper jokingly trying to get in between the two of them. Knowing they wouldn't find a reprieve like this for a while, Olwen and Landon joined in. By the time late night fell, everyone was exhausted but happy. Elijah, who had been shooting Stella looks for the latter half of the evening, finally scooped his mate up in his arms and whisked the both of them away to their room. Leaving the couple to a prosperous wedding night, the others stayed to clean up the area before they would turn in themselves. After bidding goodnight to Cale and Elijah's parents, Olwen headed out of the motel for a final stroll. The night was cool, and the wind blew through her soft brown hair. She sighed, inhaling the night air for a moment before exhaling. The final signature had been procured just a few minutes ago, and Landon was in the motel lobby finalizing all the details before he would officially send the requesting of the Alpha Challenge to the Silver Arrow pack. Olwen dreaded to know the response that would come from that, but knew that in the direction Alpha Aaron and his father had already gone, that it was necessary. Her mind continued to drift as she walked along the streets. There were still people out this late, but not much. A street busker was quietly packing up his guitar for the day, as a few younger teenagers chatted and laughed, heading home after a day out. Olwen almost missed it as something small bumped into her. "Oh, sorry, Miss Pretty Lady." The Luna looked down, before recognition hit her. It was the same young girl that she and Landon had encountered in the diner in this town all those weeks ago. Olwen smiled warmly and gently knelt down to be at the girl's eye level. "It's just okay, just be careful next time." "What are you doing out here though?" "It's late." The girl gazed at Olwen with wide innocent eyes, but even now the brown hair and green irises still looked too similar to Aaron's. She sounded sheepish. "I was playing hide and seek with some friends." I guess we played too long, so I was running home so my mommy and daddy wouldn't be too worried about me. Pushing aside the uncanny resemblance for a moment, Alwyn patted the girl's head and stood up. Well, remember not to be out too long next time. I understand that playing with your friends is fun, but it's not the safest for you to be out so late at this hour. And you don't want your parents to worry too much about you, right? The girl nodded enthusiastically. Yes, I remember. Thank you, Miss Pretty Lady. Alwyn was about to offer to walk the girl home herself when a relieved voice came from a distance away. Tonya, there you are. A woman not that much older than her, with pale blonde hair and grey eyes, rushed over and pulled the child into a tight embrace. Where have you been? She lightly grasped the girl's shoulders with an anxious look. I'm sorry, Mummy, I was playing hide and seek with my friends and got carried away. Tonya responded, just relieved to see her mother. I was on the way home when I bumped into this nice lady. She reminded me I shouldn't be out here so late. It was then that Tonya's mother looked up to see Alwyn standing there watching the exchange, her eyes widening before she pulled her daughter behind her warily. Wait, are you? Alwyn opened her mouth to speak before she realized what the woman was referring to. The very muted scent of peaches and cherries reached her. It hadn't been very obvious, but judging from a bracelet that the woman wore around her wrist, she was using a suppression charm. You're a rogue, Alwyn said, once she'd finally found her voice. And you're the new Luna of the Moon River Pack. The woman responded. Tonya looked between her mother and Alwyn, confused about what was happening. You know who I am. We may no longer all live in the forest, but we have our own means of keeping ourselves in the know. The last time Alwyn had encountered a rogue was when they'd fought over a piece of prey as wolves, reminding her that she had been just like this woman for 3 months. She immediately lowered her hands, not wanting to look threatening. I'm not here to cause any harm to anyone. Alwyn spoke, keeping her voice soft and gentle. I was having a final evening walk before I go back to the motel, and I accidentally ran into your daughter. The woman tilted her head apprehensively before her posture relaxed slightly, but she kept Tonya behind her. I see. Well, thank you. Tonya has always been rather adventurous compared to her brother, so it's good you reminded her not to stay out too late, she said. Try as she might, Alwyn couldn't stop looking at the young girl. There was some resemblance to her mother, in terms of face shape and the beauty mark on her cheek, but she was still bursting with questions. The woman gave her an unreadable expression before she sighed. Would you like to come over to my home for a short while? I promise you will return to your motel safely. Though Alwyn still retained a nagging fear about rogues, she recalled Landon's words regarding not all of them being hostile, and nodded slowly. Of course. Very well. Come this way, Luna Alwyn. The woman dipped her head to her and took Tonya by the hand, leading her down the street with Alwyn following them. As she did, she dropped a text to Alpha Landon. She didn't want her mate to get anxious about her disappearing on him, and she had to take precautions. Tonya's mother didn't seem like a threatening presence despite being a rogue, but she had to be absolutely sure. The woman Priscilla lived not too far away from the motel. Her house was surrounded by a nice garden of colorful flowers, and as Alwyn followed her in, various aromas of rose, lemon, and even sage greeted her as she passed. Alwyn bid good-night to Tonya, whom Priscilla sent to her father for bed with an affectionate tousling of her brown hair. After she guided her daughter up the stairs to her bedroom, Priscilla headed back down to her guest. Do sit down. She gestured to the dining table near the door. Nodding as thanks, Alwyn slid into one of the seats as Priscilla sat opposite her. Tea. She motioned to a teapot she had on the table. I had this brewing here before I went out to look for my daughter. With Opal not sensing anything of note, Alwyn accepted the offer with a short nod, keeping the teacup in her hands as Priscilla poured a second for herself before looking up. I'm surprised to see you all the way out here. Many wolves have chosen to steer clear of these parts either out of fear or disgust of rogues or humans. Olwen shrugged. Alpha Landon said this was a nice place, and he took me here for one of our dates. I wasn't aware there were rogues in the area. There aren't many. Priscilla replied. Just a few, myself and my family included. A lot of rogues have chosen to create communities themselves rather than integrate into human society. Makes us feel lower, especially since we are packless. Then why are you living among humans? Olwen asked, gazing at her with curiosity and still some amount of wariness. It's a bit of a long story. It's why I asked you back here. The rogues have heard rumors regarding what happened at this year's Evergreen Pack function. And given you were exiled from the Silver Arrow Pack and lived as a rogue briefly, I consider you decently trustworthy. Olwen frowned slightly, putting pieces together thus far from what the woman had said. You have specific grievances with my former pack. Practically every rogue does by now, but yes. Priscilla nods. You could say that the fight that broke out all those years ago was caused by the Silver Arrow Pack. Olwen raised an eyebrow at this. There was never any concrete reason given for why the attacks had occurred, only the speculation that the packless wolves had plotted to take over the wilds, having grown envious and resentful of their prosperity and success. In a way, Priscilla's voice trailed off before she hung her head with a slightly ashamed expression. It was also started by me. The rogue gave Olwen a while to absorb this. Okay. How did you start the rogue attacks? Priscilla set her tea aside before beginning to speak, the way her hands were fidgeting, giving away that she had never really told others this. It all started years ago. I originally lived in an unclaimed piece of forest with my family. But when the Ocean Gem Pack expanded their territory, we were displaced and I lost my parents and sister to illnesses and starvation. I began going from pack to seek shelter, but I was turned away. I was too weak and had nothing to offer to anyone. Until I arrived at the Silver Arrow Pack. Her expression turned slightly wistful. I had been loitering near the pack borders for days, but I knew I was near the strongest pack in the wilds and couldn't bring myself to show in front of any of the guards I knew were there. But then, someone found and talked to me. He was the first pack wolf who didn't immediately question or look down on me, and actually sat me down and listened as I told him my backstory and my grievances. He allowed me to stay around that area of pack territory and assured me no harm would come to me. Olwen listened, nodding to show her interest was being held. For 6 months, no other pack warriors came near where I was or chased me away. He came to visit me frequently, sometimes bringing food or medicine when I needed, and we grew close. Naturally, I fell in love after some time. Priscilla shifted in her seat slightly. I held nothing back. He told me he felt the same way, and eventually we became intimate. He promised me he was working out a way to bring me into the pack. But that all changed when I fell pregnant. I thought he would be overjoyed, but he reacted the exact opposite. He told me he already had a mate, and with the appearance of children that could resemble him, there was no way I could be allowed into the pack now. He chased me away, and I was forced to give birth in the hollow of a large tree. Olwen winced at the imagery. She could imagine that birthing a child in the forest, without any help, must have been difficult for Priscilla. I wandered around the wilds, trying to protect my children when I then met another. Keith was a rogue himself, and a fierce fighter. He saved my son Felix from drowning in a lake. When I finally told him the story of how I had ended up in my state, he promised to exact vengeance on the Silver Arrow Pack for me. He slowly won over more rogues throughout the Evergreen Wilds through both his words and his strength, and that was what led to the uprising. Priscilla nodded, her expression grave. I was still feeling betrayed over it all, so I initially devoted myself to supporting Keith. But it didn't take long for the cause to shift. It was no longer about bringing the man who had betrayed me to justice, but about also punishing the rest of the packs, including innocent children, who had no part in their treatment of us. Olwen nodded, her heart breaking as she recalled hearing of all the younger children who had been killed in some of the other packs. She thought it a miracle then that the Silver Arrow pack had anticipated the rogue attack and sent all vulnerable members into a safety bunker. I began to object to Keith's methods, but he was too far gone, just like the rest of his followers. He held Felix and Tonya hostage and forced me to be part of an attack on the Fireclaw pack. Priscilla pressed her lips together as the unpleasant memories flashed through her head. I wanted to run away, but I couldn't leave my children behind. But then, she let out what sounded like a sigh of relief. One of the pack warriors I tried to attack was my fated mate. I confessed to him that I was being forced against my will, and he just left his life in the Fireclaw pack behind, rescued both Felix and Tonya and fled with me. We eventually settled here. She glanced in the direction of the stairs with a smile on her face. Tristan showed me what true love was supposed to be. He may not be my children's biological father, but he is in every other way. Once the uprising had been quelled and I heard Keith had been killed, I expected Tristan to leave and return to his pack. But he told me that he wouldn't go anywhere if I couldn't accompany him. Olwen couldn't help the way her shoulders sagged with relief at the way Priscilla's story concluded. With all the suffering she had endured as a rogue, she deserved a good mate and a safe life where she could raise her children away from danger. But then something else occurred to her, and she sat up, her hand raising up to her mouth. Wait, this man whom you fell in love with from the Silver Arrow pack, who was he? Priscilla lifted her eyes to Olwen's, and before her mouth had even formed the syllable, the latter knew what she was going to say. Bradley Young. Chapter 32 Severed. It was much to Luna Kyle's overwhelming relief and joy that she woke up one morning and was able to once again smell the scent of driftwood on the sheets, and see the color that had returned to her form. Kira, who had been comatose for weeks after the wolfsbane punishment, briefly admonished her human for trying to attack Olwen at the function with an heirloom that had been created solely for self-defense, shortly before Kylie suppressed her again with a scoff. She didn't need to be reminded of that now. With her strength back, she could return to her duties as Luna of the Silver Arrow pack, at least what was left of it. She'd wallowed in shame, having felt nothing but numb the past month, wolfless and weak. The pack members that were left hadn't hesitated to openly show that they neither respected nor liked her. She'd learnt from her mistakes. It didn't matter if Olwen was now a Luna herself, Kylie was still Luna of the strongest pack in the forest. She'd heard that Alpha Aaron was in the process of negotiating a deal with Alpha Frederick that would surely bring up their numbers, so they were bound to bounce back after the massive setback they'd endured. And as for how both father and son were holding her responsible for making a fool out of the Silver Arrow pack at the function, she knew she would have to hold her tongue next time. Her fellow leaders didn't need to know their flaws by having them being addressed out loud. She'd strode down to try and find Alpha Aaron and inform him of the good news, secretly pleased that some of the pack members she passed by either nervously avoided her gaze or shrunk back upon realizing her wolf had been restored. Much to her chagrin, however, she was stopped at the office building entrance by Gamma Edric, who informed her that Alpha Aaron, his father and Beta Caden, were in a deep discussion about something and that they did not wish to be disturbed. Luna Kylie was very tempted to knock the Gamma unconscious and go to demand an audience with her mate, but held back after recalling that it would not make things look any better for her in Aaron's eyes. Forced to head back home, she decided on the next best thing. She would surprise her husband. He hadn't mentioned Olwen at all since they'd come back, and hopefully she could remind him exactly why he'd chosen her to be his mate in the first place. After dinner, Kylie spent the next few hours giving herself a relaxing bubble bath, before finding a translucent nightgown that she had last used the night after her and Aaron's marking ceremony. Wearing the comfortable fabric, which purposely hid next to nothing beneath, she combed her auburn hair and went to light some candles up to their shared bedroom. She slid into bed after covering the sheets with rose petals, relaxing on her back and busying herself with the latest updates on the online bulletin before she heard the front door open sometime later. Her amber eyes lighting up, Kylie sat up and arranged herself into a more seductive pose, making sure to show off her curves more, as she heard Aaron's steps slowly ascend the stairs. His driftwood scent came toward her long before the door opened, and she could finally raise her head and look her mate in the eyes with a confident expression. "Alpha Aaron, you're back. I was worried you'd forgotten about me." Aaron's expression, as he looked at her, was currently unreadable, as he stayed put by the door. Figuring he could use some coaxing, Kylie swung her legs up and off the bed, getting up and sauntering towards him with her swaying hips. "I have my wolf back," she purred, reaching up and tracing a hand across his shoulder, remembering how that would drive him crazy back in the day. "I've missed your scent and I know you've missed mine." She gently leaned closer to him, making sure to accentuate her figure in that revealing nightgown, as she brought her lips ever so close to his. "Are you fucking kidding me?" Kylie stiffened at the repulsion in Aaron's voice. It sounded even more visceral in his tone now than when she'd temporarily lost her wolf. "What?" She was further caught off guard as Aaron pushed her away with surprising force, causing her to stumble back on the bed and scattering the rose petals all over the floor. Kylie had known Alpha Aaron was strong, but he'd never used force on her in this way. "Alpha dash." Kylie gasped, stunned by how easily her mate had just turned her down. "I was just. Did you seriously think that if you seduced me that I would magically forget about all the trouble you caused me and the Silver Arrow pack?" Aaron snapped, glaring at her. "You seem to have not learnt a thing even after losing Kira for a month." "I have learnt my lesson, I promise," Kylie exclaimed, sitting up with a desperate, pleading expression. "I'll do better, both as your mate and your Luna." "Do better?" Aaron scoffed at her words. "All I asked of you was basic politeness and decency at the function, and you couldn't even fulfill that. You offended more than one leader with your blatant lack of awareness. And not to mention your pitiful attempt at poisoning Olwen. I couldn't help myself once you abandoned me most of the night, and kept gazing after her like some lost pup." Kylie retaliated, her eyes flashing with anger. "I'm supposed to be your mate, you chose me to be the Luna." Aaron emitted a low growl and made her flinch. "Then you should have acted like a proper Luna," he snarled. "Not some jealous teenager." Kylie flushed red at his insult, and then Aaron shook his head and muttered under his breath. "Had she changed places with you, I doubt Olwen would have done what you did." Hearing her name from the Alpha's lips immediately brought back every single fear that Kylie had thought up while in her wolfless state, and she flew into a rage. "Don't you dare compare me to her." She stood up and stalked towards her mate. "Olwen is not your mate anymore, and you should accept that." With her red water boiling, Kylie made to punch Aaron, but for all her strength, she was still no match for an Alpha. Her fist was halted mid-swing, and then Aaron's hand was around her throat and lifting her off the ground, making her wriggle and gasp for air. Her amber eyes gazed down into the Alpha's green ones with fear and pleading, but unlike last time, where it had been us attempting to strangle her, she couldn't rely on Aaron to save her now. The look on the man's face as he held her above the floor, her feet dangling, was nothing short of venomous. It was a far cry from the excitement and desire his gaze once held for her. And then he spoke the words that she feared receiving the most. "I was wrong to choose you over Olwen." Alpha Aaron spat, staring coldly at her. "Perhaps I only loved you physically back then, but now, even looking at you makes me sick. Ever since you were given the post of Luna, you've become even more arrogant, violent, and impulsive. The more I think about it, the more I'm starting to believe that you were always like this, but didn't show it until you had the power to." Kylie kicked her legs to no avail, still choking as her eyes flashed rapidly between hers and Kira's. "Alpha." I'm sorry. Aaron's expression did not waver, the hatred within only intensifying. You are the most pathetic and disgusting she-wolf I have ever known. He released her like that, and Kylie immediately crumbled to the bedroom floor, taking in deep gasps of oxygen. Her hair was now a mess, and her heart was thudding madly at the thought that her chosen mate might have killed her. She barely had more time to recover and get back on her feet when Aaron's voice cut through the air again. I, Alpha Aaron Young, reject Kylie Paxton as my mate. Kylie let out a shocked cry and collapsed back onto the floor, holding her chest as the sting of the rejection seared through it. Though not as intense as the rejection between two fated mates, it was no less painful. As much as the woman tried to brace against the pain and hold on, when she finally managed to stare at Alpha Aaron, his face was once again devoid of sympathy despite the similar sensations he was experiencing. It was as if even if the rejection killed them both, he wouldn't care. Kylie Paxton. Kylie gritted out, tears streaming down her cheeks from the effort. Accept your rejection, Alpha Aaron. At last, the pain stopped and Kylie caught her breath before gazing back up with forlorn betrayal written all over her face. She didn't take long to see that her mark on Aaron's neck had faded to leave a thin scar, and without looking into a mirror she knew the same had happened to her. With the reality of it all slowly dawning, Kylie sunk to her knees in a terrified panic and bowed in front of her now former mate, reaching for his feet. No, Alpha Aaron, please, I'm sorry for everything I did. Please give me another chance. I'll try my best to be a good mate. I'll try to be like Olwen if I have to. But that's just it, isn't it? Aaron looked down at her and scared with annoyance. You're not Olwen. Kylie began to actually cry and blubber, holding onto Aaron's leg. How could she show her face to the rest of the pack now? Alpha Aaron, I beg of you. Please, don't do this to me. I'm not done. Aaron snapped, pulling back his leg. I was in discussion with my father, and not only are you unfit to be Luna, but you are also unfit to be a member of this pack. Kylie's tear-filled eyes widened. No, you can't mean that. Kylie Paxton, as of this moment you are also exiled from the Silver Arrow pack. The Alpha continued firmly, taking a step back. You are to change out of these appalling clothes into something more presentable, before you will be escorted out into the wilds. If you ever think of setting foot back in my territory again, I will not hesitate to have you killed. The ex-Luna sobbed as she felt the mind link with the rest of the pack sever itself at Aaron's words, leaving her a mess on the ground. You have 5 minutes, he said. Then get out of my sight. He turned and left the room, slamming the door shut behind him. I heard Kylie departed the Silver Arrow pack last night. Bradley spoke, entering the Alpha's office as Aaron was awaiting a response from Alpha Frederick. Good job. Continuing to associate ourselves with that wretched she-wolf would not have gone well. Aaron, eyes fixated on the computer screen, nodded. I only did what was necessary. Kylie had left the pack in a much more subdued and humiliated state than she had been without her wolf. She hadn't fought back or protested after all her initial pleas went ignored, and didn't give Alpha Aaron a single glance, her head bowed as the pack warriors, led by Delta Jace, escorted her out the west side of the borders. Now that Kylie has been taken care of, you should find a new Luna. Bradley reminded him gruffly, his eyes fixated on his son. With the pack in the state it is, they need a better leader to assure them. Dad, I understand. Aaron responded, trying to hide the exasperation in his voice. I'll start the proceedings for finding another Luna soon. Oz growled with disapproval, sensing his human's reluctance to start the proceedings. He hadn't objected this time round when Aaron had chosen to reject Kylie, but whether it had been for the right reasons was a whole other question. You'd better find someone sane this time round. The wolf snorted, and Aaron rolled his eyes. Nevertheless, after being pushed by his father to prioritize this, given a Luna was a show of strength, Alpha Aaron summoned the remainder of the Silver Arrow pack, and informed them he would screen all the eligible she-wolves and select a new chosen mate out of them. By now, everyone else knew that Luna丨had been removed, and while there was an air of relief, there were still some wary faces directed at Alpha Aaron. He had been partially responsible for everything that had occurred by allowing that disgraced she-wolf to become a leader after all. Still, Bradley was right in the fact that for some, it provided an amount of hope that the pack could be saved after all. Word quickly spread, with pack members putting forward their wishes that their next Luna set a better example for the Silver Arrow pack, and some she-wolves getting excited to get a chance to occupy the position themselves. But as he met with each candidate, he only spent the necessary amount of time with her before dismissing the woman and moving on to the next. All he could think about was that their scents didn't smell floral or sweet enough, that their hair wasn't the way he liked, even down to the way some of them laughed. As night fell and he looked through all the profiles of the she-wolves he'd screened that day, the only maiden in his head, the ideal one, had gentle grey eyes, soft lips and pale brown hair. Oz growled warningly. Aaron. The alpha sighed in frustration, not responding to his wolf as he got up, headed into what was now his bedroom alone, and closed the door behind him. As he approached the bed he frowned, still sensing Kyla's green apple scent wafting off it. With a snarl of disgust, he yanked off the sheets and threw them into a laundry basket in the corner of the room, fitting the bed with a fresh new sheet in a matter of minutes. He crawled beneath the covers, turning off the light and lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. He'd chosen these new sheets after recalling Olwen had chosen them after she'd moved in with him, but after months of repeated washing and disuse, her scent had long gone. Aaron tensed with envy as he imagined Olwen halfway across the wilds, resting in Alpha Landon's arms this very moment. His mind brought him back to the night of the function, when he'd first seen her again in that beautiful dress. When she descended the steps with Landon, she looked like an angel, her movements making her practically float across the floor with grace. And when she'd finally greeted him, the smell of lavender and sweet honey almost made him drop to her knees. Aaron replayed the events of the night, except this time Luna丨wasn't there with him. He saw himself seizing Luna Olwen by the wrist and dragging her into the corridor, while Alpha Landon was occupied, pinning her wrists above her head. "I missed you," he growled into her ear. And unlike in reality, where Olwen had treated him with polite civility and distance, the one in his fantasy shivered, a blush forming on her cheeks and her pupils dilating as she gazed up at him. "I missed you too." Aaron released a possessive groan, crashing his mouth directly onto hers. She gasped and immediately responded, the alpha greedily drinking in her scent as they kissed passionately. His hand trailed down her waist and pulled her thigh up against his hip. But he couldn't control himself for long, hoisting both legs around him before carrying Olwen off to the nearest bedroom and officially marking her as his. Us pulling him back to reality, Aaron scowled as his hands clenched the sheets. Perhaps she wouldn't even have been at the function, they could have had her marking ceremony with him here in the Silver Arrow pack, before he whisked her back to their shared home. But as things had gone, the last time he and Olwen had interacted in their shared home had been the day she caught him in bed with Kylie. He had thought Kylie was prettier, stronger, more capable of being the mate of an alpha. It took him almost 6 months to finally realize that Olwen had indeed been the better choice in every aspect, only for Landon to have gotten to her first. Aaron was missing the way Oz had pushed him to think about his ex-fated. He could still feel that his wolf was drawn to Olwen and Opal, but it was more subdued than before. In comparison to him, Oz was now trying to convince him to give up on their former mate and move on. It was as if he and his wolf couldn't agree on anything regarding their love life, ever since Olwen had originally been revealed to be his destined mate 2 years back. Just what was this woman doing to him? Aaron's phone pinged with a notification, and wanting some kind of distraction from his thoughts he sat up to retrieve it. It was an email from, as luck would have it, Alpha Landon of the Moon River Pack. He frowned, already feeling an unpleasantness rising in his gut before he froze at the word in the subject head. Challenge. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.